Hello, and welcome to this asynchronous video recording. And I want to start by thanking you for spending your time with us today. Our time together will be focused on overviewing the self-assessment survey. This presentation was created for the district partnerships of the Behavior Alliance of South Carolina in order to build a shared understanding of why this tool for collecting data is important to all members of the school community. The Behavior Alliance of South Carolina is an organization that believes we're most effective if all students have the opportunity to experience a strong sense of belonging and therefore be successful in school. In order to accomplish this, the Behavior Alliance works closely with various levels, agencies, and systems across the state of South Carolina. To learn more and to take full advantage of the ways that you can engage with us, follow us on social media at Basque Behavior and explore our website at www.behavioralliance.org. By the end of this video recording, participants will be able to define multi-tiered systems of support for behavior, describe the role survey data plays in fidelity measures and action planning, describe how MTSS-B is measured and implemented with fidelity, detail the process of self-assessment survey administration and next steps in order to complete the self-assessment survey or the SAS effectively. This is our agenda for our session, so please take a moment to read through the components of our time together. For additional information on terms used within this presentation, please see the definitions included on this page. Feel free to pause the video now to read the glossary before continuing on. Before we actually look at the self-assessment survey, it's important to create a shared understanding of what the survey aims to measure and the process it can be used to inform, which is the multi-tiered systems of support for behavior. Oftentimes, when we hear MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support, we think of academics, but we also use this framework for behavior. In order to be successful, the work must be integrated into other aspects rather than standalone, siloed approaches. This work is rooted in and built for South Carolina's content from others who have led similar changes in their contexts. In particular, our school-wide behavior supports emphasize evidence-based supports and the integration of data, systems, and practices across 3 tiers. Universal, or Tier 1, include school-wide supports that are available to all students from all adults at all times. Targeted, or Tier 2, includes small group research-based interventions available to some students for short periods of times. And finally, individual, or Tier 3, include intensive, individualized, research-based interventions provided to the few highest need students and are designed by individualized student teams. This poses the big question. Well, how do we build this? And we know the answer. By using lots of data, purposefully and intentionally, that is. It's important that we be thoughtful about changes to school-wide systems and to target areas that would benefit from improvement while still maintaining components that are functioning well. This cannot be done effectively without the use of data. And there's 2 types of data. We have fidelity and outcome. To determine the type of data that's the best fit for building the multi-tiered system of support for behavior, we're going to look at what we're measuring. With these 2 types of data that we use to evaluate our progress in PBIS, we have fidelity data, which helps us measure whether we did what we planned to do. And then outcome data helps us to determine whether our plan was successful. The self-assessment survey falls under a fidelity measure and is a valuable tool in determining if what's actually taking place across various school settings is aligned with what is actually in place, thus measuring if our plan was done with fidelity. The self-assessment survey, walkthrough, and user guide all have specific purposes, which help us measure our implementation of PBIS and support accurate scoring on the Tiered Fidelity Inventory, or the TFI. The self-assessment survey helps us understand what is the priority for improvement and what has been accomplished. The walkthrough helps us measure the extent to which PBIS is impacting students and staff. Although it's a small sample size, the interview style of the walkthrough usually gives really great insight in the reality of what's actually happening in our buildings. And finally, the user guide is there to help document and organize the sustainable systems that we are creating. The user guide should be small in the beginning and grow naturally as a result of PBIS implementation. The self assessment survey, walkthrough, and user guide, along with any other identified data, should be reviewed to identify strengths and needs prior to scoring the Tier Fidelity Inventory, or TFI. This process of reviewing the data should include a variety of stakeholders, not just the PBIS team. And once the data is reviewed, the TFI will be scored by the PBIS team, and 1 to 3 priorities will be chosen as a focus for the action plan. Now that you have an understanding of MTSS for behavior and the role that the self assessment survey will play in data collection, we are ready to collect the data. In order to do so, we need your input. There are 2 parts to the survey administration. The first part is the self assessment survey. The self assessment survey gives us insight into the staff's perception of the effectiveness of our behavior support systems and need for improvement. Our goal is for 100% of our staff to participate in the survey each year, which means this survey is taken annually. There are 4 sections of the self assessment survey. They are all aligned with the MTSS for behavior tiers. The first is our Tier 1 school-wide systems. This looks at all students, all staff, in all locations. The second is Tier 1 classroom systems. These are instructional settings in which staff supervise and teach groups of students. Then we have our Tier 2 systems, targeted intervention to students who require this support beyond Tier 1. And finally, Tier 3 systems, specific supports for students who engage in chronic behaviors of concern. It's important to note that staff should fill out the self assessment survey based on their own personal experiences with each setting. It's helpful to gather a wide variety of perspectives from staff, and every staff member's perspectives and feedback should be encouraged and valued. The goal is to capture individual opinions and look at the results in the aggregate. The goal of the self assessment survey is not to get a high score. Instead, the goal is to help us gather meaningful staff feedback to inform our decisions. This is what the online self assessment survey looks like when staff take it. Each item will ask staff to indicate the current status of the item as not in place, partially in place, or in place. They will then indicate the priority of improvement for each item as high, medium, or low. For example, this question falls under the school-wide systems and is asking staff to rate the item behavior definitions. The item includes a description of what it would look like for the item to be fully in place. Underneath each item, staff will select their rating for the current status of the item and the priority of improvement for that item. The first row allows you to determine if the feature is in place or not, and the second row asks you to assign it a priority level. This is an example of what the online self-assessment survey item looks like after the staff member has indicated their rating for both categories. This question format is consistently used throughout all 4 areas of the entire self-assessment survey. Once all items have been rated, the survey has been completed and can be submitted. The second part of the survey you'll be completing is the staff well-being survey. Recognized as the leading measure of staff well-being, the Maslach Burnout Inventory, or the MBI, is validated by the extensive research that has been conducted in more than 35 years since its initial publication. MBI Educator Survey, or the MBIES, is a version of the original MBI for use with educators, including teachers, administrators, other staff members, and volunteers working in any educational setting. The survey items address 3 scales that align with the World Health Organization's definition of burnout: emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and personal accomplishment. It is likely that you intuitively understand the relationship between school climate and teacher-staff well-being. There is research supporting that relationship, and we know the level of well-being concerns nationally. K-12 teachers are the #1 most burnout profession in the United States. 44% of teachers in K-12 schools report often or always feeling burnt out. 90% of teachers claim that feeling burnt out is a serious problem. Over half of teachers say that they will leave teaching sooner than originally planned. And there are more than 500,000 fewer educators in the American public school systems post-pandemic. So this survey will give your school the opportunity to understand the level of well-being perceived by your staff. Upon taking the survey, you will have the opportunity to opt in to helping the Behavior Alliance of South Carolina team study staff well-being. This is optional, but we appreciate your consideration in sharing your responses with us. Diving into the next component of our session, we'll now discuss data analysis and use. As mentioned earlier, after the self-assessment survey is completed, it's important to involve stakeholders in the data analysis process. School teams can focus on analyzing the self-assessment survey or can add other data sources to this activity. There's no right or wrong way to digest the data, but one example might be to put poster paper on the wall and organize staff and students in small groups, and then have them identify the strengths and areas of growth in each section of the self-assessment survey. The goal would be to determine what are 1 to 2 major strengths and to celebrate them, and 1 to 2 areas of growth, which would help inform the scoring of the tiered fidelity inventory and potentially become an action plan priority. If you are looking at multiple sources of data with a similar activity, you can add groups to analyze the walkthrough results, the annual evaluation, and any other identified fidelity and outcome data sources, such as school climate surveys. The more stakeholders that are part of this process, the better we will be able to gather diverse voices and improve our selection of what we should be focused on. Remember, the goal in planning is to recognize that we can only do a few things well. So let's gather our data, choose wisely, and put our energy behind implementing our priorities and evaluating their impact on school climate instead of trying to do everything. We hope that you've enjoyed this overview of the self-assessment survey. To get the full benefits from the self-assessment survey, schools should review with staff annually how to take the survey and involve school staff in the data analysis so that the results become a meaningful part of measuring progress and determining priorities. Thank you for your time and engagement throughout this asynchronous video recording. For more information on the self-assessment survey, please reach out to your district behavior coordinator, which can be found on the district partnerships page of the Behavior Alliance of South Carolina's website at www.behavioralliance.org/district-partnerships or visit pbisapps.org. Stay connected with the Behavior Alliance by joining our mailing list for exclusive access to all of our content and check us out on social media. We'd love to have you join our community by engaging with us with a like, follow, comment, or share. Thanks again.